Now, as I begin to evolve, I, I just, so I certainly never, I never made any conscious decision. And as a matter of fact, the reason I think that Brooks article is so wonderful, because it just came out in the New York Times a couple, 3 weeks ago, and he's written a book. David Brooks is his name. He's a famous New York Times columnist. And he talked about the problem, the world that we live in, is so many of us live according to, developing our resume, accomplishments. And of course you do. And at your age, you've got to do that. You've got to get your degree. You've got to, you work to get your first position. And this is all kind of, I think we all started that way, we all get, but then at a certain point, you begin to realize that as important as that is, only to the extent that you really develop your humanity, who you are inside. Your capacity to love, your capacity to empathize, your capacity to look inside yourself, first of all, and actually love yourself. That's a big challenge for everybody, learning to love yourself. Huge challenge. And all that's part of it, so. Sure. I was just so struck with these two words. There's the way David Brooks, resume and eulogy. And eulogy, is, I've had occasion to give the eulogy at the memorial services of people that were very close to me, and that's obviously, we talk about their afterglow. Last night we were talking about seventh movement of the Brahms, if Verka folgen ihre Nacht, and their works follow after them, and that's really what that seventh movement is all about, the kind of afterglow, the things that people remember that are really important, not about what we achieved, not about how much money we made, not about how many degrees we have and all this stuff, but who we are as human beings, and that's our life goal, isn't it? To become ever more, together, integrated human beings, So.
Wonderful. Questions?
Anybody, fire away. Don't be shy. Come on. Somebody break the ice. Just here.
Every time you work with a new choir, what's the first thing you do to get acquainted with them, like mentally?
I just listen. But I have a sound in my ear. I have an idea about how the piece should go, and I just start doing it. And so but as you do it, you sort of learn. What needs this, that, or the other, and sort of proceed from there. So I don't have any formulas for anything. I don't understand that world, the whole kind of workshop world of, 10 easy steps to choral excellence, I don't get, because there aren't any 10 easy steps to any kind of thing, I just don't get that, Every situation is different, I don't get teaching conducting in which everybody sort of looks like the teacher, Because every human being is different. Each of us has a different psychophysical makeup. And so we're going to look different, and we're going to listen for different things in a certain sort of way, So I'm not sure I answered your question, but I just start. But I've come to it with an absolute sense of how I think it should go, and certainly some decision. I sent a big, heavily marked score to Professor Frankum, so you had a lot of markings ahead of time, so that was already kind of taken care of, and then we just started, and here we are. Yeah. I find it's fairly easy for me to begin to get a sound that sort of resonates with me, and that's kind of mostly that's not done not by what you talk about, but what you do with your hands. I think the biggest impact, you can talk till the cows come home, but finally how the sound really in its final manifestation comes from what you do with your hands, Which is not to say that group vocal techniques and all that stuff is not essential, certainly, and I know you get wonderful work, because I know who his teacher was, who's one of my close friends, who's one of the masters of, and a woman that had a huge impact on me was a close colleague of Brenda Smith, a woman who's written some. Well, they've probably read in Brenda's books, haven't they?
No, some of them have purchased it as their choral, as their conducting textbook.
Yeah. But anyway, so I'm not diminishing the importance of that at all. But but finally, when you're making the music, what you do here is, kind of what really makes the difference, I think. Yeah.
Good, next question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is actually kind of similar to her question. It's more so when you start a piece with a choir, though. I attended a conference in fall, and the person who spoke at this lecture was saying about how a lot of times choirs will have such great blends, but they lack like rhythmic stability, or they'll
Yeah.
like how do you approach all that together?
Well, no, that's a very good question. I mean, let me just for general principles, because I mean, I've, had most of my life has been spent working, with college-age students and professional people, but kind of some cardinal principle. When I start to teach a piece of music, well, if it's really complicated, I'll start with section rehearsals. The worst thing you can do in teaching a piece of music is just plow through and let people make mistakes, because once that happens, it's really hard. It's difficult to erase the imprint that early mistakes have. So I almost always teach a piece with a neutral syllable, like do 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 or da da do do do. Get the text out of the way. Any text, and English is the most difficult text sometimes to work with, because we all have a different idea of how English goes, depending on where we grew up and all that kind of stuff. And then if it's a foreign language, like before, we're teaching the Brahms Requiem. Now, at Westminster, most of the students would have had, almost all of them would have had a German diction, but we'd go very slowly through with IPA, for example, and then speaking the text in rhythm, for example. But now the rhythmic issues, fundamentally, again, part of that starting process of teaching a piece of music is count singing. Do a lot of count singing, because until there's inner rhythm, there's no. Once people go how it sounds, unless there's a heartbeat, it just falls apart. There's nothing for it to hang together. Rhythm is absolutely critical. So, if in an interesting sort of way, if you had to prioritize the thing, that rhythm would almost be first, because right pitches without rhythm, you just have chaos. But you can make wonderful shapes and wonderful with just rhythm, just plain old rhythm, Yeah. So does that kind of answer your question? Yeah. I mean, in every case you're figuring out, you just have to know the level with which of the group with which you're starting, and and if you're starting with a bunch of great kids who have no reading skills at all, well then at the same time you're probably teaching them to read, teaching them intervals and all this kind of stuff, I'm talking about if you're teaching in high school, for example, or teaching in grade school, which is so important, by the way. I just think any of you that are committed to doing that, boy, hallelujah, because, it's so important. It makes such a huge impact on the development of young people. But, and absolutely central to what we do is the ability to teach. We're all teachers. I remain a teacher, how people learn. And that's when and that's the longer you go, you begin to figure out, okay. At what point in the process when you go, let's say they're having a difficulty with a certain passage, and you go over it several times. One of the things you learn to sense is, okay, now they really have it, because they may go through it and it'd be absolutely perfect, but your intuition says, there's still some people that are really insecure, and that's all part of learning how people, understanding how people learn, because it's absolutely critical. How you start a piece, a lot of it's rhythm. Speak the words in rhythm, for example, or tap the rhythm, have them clap the rhythm, just all kinds of make up stuff, I make up stuff all the time, teaching a piece of music. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good. Other questions? Austin.
When you give a piece of music for the first time that you don't know, how do you acquaint yourself?
That's a good question. Several times. I mean, I have sort of some keyboard skills, so I do that. I may sing one part, play another part. And, I will, at least initially, I'll probably, to get a sense of the piece, listen to a recording or two, not to copy at all, but, it's just one of the ways you can learn. But that's, that you have to be really careful about. But I just, work keyboard, play and sing until I get the sound in my ear. Now, if it's a piece that's in more familiar harmonic language, and sometimes I can hear what it sounds like, because I've been doing it for such a long time. If it's if it's a piece of Mozart, a piece of whatever, I can sort of hear it because I've done so much of it, But if it's some really difficult contemporary piece, then tear it apart, Just sing it until you get it in your ear, and then one of the things I did in graduate conducting at Westminster in the last semester is we'd take a piece of Renaissance polyphony. It just drove my students crazy, and we'd have assignments, and they'd have to. It was a three-voice mass of William Byrd, and I said, okay, this week, we're gonna play and sing these two parts. So they'd come they'd have little appointments with you, like 10-minute appointments every week, and then they'd have to play two voices and sing the third voice. What they learned, what they discovered was what it was really like to know a piece. Until you can hear everything that's going on, you don't know the piece.
Great. If there was a composer you could meet in real life,
Brahms.
okay, and why? Or what questions would you ask him? Let's say that.
I don't know what questions I'd ask. I have to think about that. I just have this great passion for Brahms. I mean, I love Bach, Stravinsky, Beethoven. It goes on and on and on. I mean, I love any great music, Britain. Hey, but I just have this huge passion for Brahms. I guess part of it is this kind of this North German romantic. The German romanticism really resonates with me, and partially because I've got some German in me, and also because Brahms is the sort of fascinating combination of the romantic long line with more traditional approach to structure. He was still writing, and that really appeals to me as well. But I just think the Brahms Requiem is one of I think that's one of the mountaintop works of our art. Missa Solemnis, Beethoven, B minor Mass of Bach, Brahms Requiem, Verdi Requiem, 20th century Stravinsky Symphony of Songs, Britten Moore Requiem.
And do you have a favorite work to conduct?
Well, it would be Missa Solemnis. Yeah, the work I wish because it's so difficult. You don't get many. I'd love to do the Missa Solemnis. I've had a lot of chances to conduct the Brahms Requiem, and I treasure every chance I'd have, as I do working with you folks. But I'd love to do the Missa Solemnis.
Well, maybe next year.
That's so difficult. It's so difficult. It's so difficult. But gosh, and the B minor Mass. Those two probably the B minor. Those three: B minor Mass, Brahms Requiem. Well, Verdi. I just done the Verdi a lot. I love the Verdi, but it's hard to say. People ask what's your favorite piece, and I say, it's one of these kind of hokey responses. It's the piece I'm working on at the moment. What I don't work on is music that I think is of no value. And the profession is loaded up with the hot composer of the moment, which usually the music doesn't interest me at all, because I don't think it has any value.
Other questions? Yes, Jenna, and then Emily.
Where are we? Hi.
You might not be able to answer this because you just said that, but do you have a favorite movement?
Darling, I lost the end of the sentence.
In the Brahms, a favorite movement.
Oh.
Number 4,
No, I think probably this last movement.
number 7.
I think the last movement probably, yeah.
Emily.
I was just going to ask, are there any new composers that have caught your eye? So far as being interested?
I missed the middle I'm sorry. Speak a little louder.
Are there any new composers whose music has caught your eye or that you've taken an interest in?
I still have trouble.
Modern composers who you've taken an interest in? Anybody that we should know about?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I've done a fair amount of Penderecki, who I think is wonderful. I mean, somebody who's writing right today. James McMillan, I think, is a great composer. He's doing wonderful stuff. It's not a world that I know as deeply as I probably should. I've done certainly works of Stephen Paulus, who's obviously more conservative 20th century composer. Who else have I recently? Because I haven't performed. I'm trying to think of things I performed recently. There's a Finnish composer, a woman, Katja Saariaho, who I think is really a fine composer. Was involved in the premiere of. There's an English composer, Thomas Ades, whose stuff is really complicated, who I think is a really wonderful composer.
Yeah, you mentioned James McMillan. Go look him up if you don't know him.
Yeah.
He's fantastic.
He's I think he's extraordinary composer. Yeah. Yes, sir.
What was your most memorable music experience?
I'm not, it's a good question, but I don't know if I have a good answer. It's interesting. Herbert von Karajan, a composer or conductor I got to meet once in Berlin, but I never got to work with him. I remember when I was, he brought the Berlin Philharmonic to Carnegie Hall, and he did 2 Brahms symphonies. First of all, I'd never heard the Berlin Philharmonic live, and that was already just, oh my God. And then this great conductor, and it was 2 Brahms symphonies. I came back to Princeton just hiring a kite. I was hiring a kite for weeks and weeks and weeks over these great performances of the Brahms symphonies. And I'm just thinking, I'm sure there are, gosh, it's hard, but because there are so many kind of, there have been so many, but that one just popped into my mind as something that had a huge influence on me. Partially because of the sound of that orchestra, that great conductor, and those 2 symphonies, which I think it was Brahms 2 and 4, And there again, my Brahms bias.
Let me ask another question along that line.
Yeah.
Are there any personal musical experiences you've had that you still have nightmares about? I have my nightmares, but certainly you must have some too.
Gosh,
Or maybe you block them out.
I'm really good at that.
Yeah.
There were moments of me being greatly embarrassed, or something didn't go the way I thought it should, and I got really depressed. When I was younger, I'd do maybe tape. We had reel-to-reel tape, and I'd tape performances, and I thought they really went really well. Then I'd listen to them, and I thought I should quit music. Since they sounded so bad. It didn't sound anything like I thought they sounded in the performance. That still sort of happens. I tend not to listen. I've been involved in a fair amount of recording, and I tend to, for example, we recorded the Bryn Mawr Requiem for the New York Philharmonic. I've never listened to the whole thing, because I always have a problem with that.
Sure, I understand. Yeah. Other questions? Austin, and then Tamara.
How do you prepare your scores, and how does the choir from the orchestras work? Or does it?
Well, how I prepare my scores, one of the things is, is how the things put together, the sort of phrase links. So I'll do a lot of vertical to help me understand that. So that's kind of how the structure, and that approach actually was something that I learned from Julius Herford. Julius Herford it turned out he was Robert Shaw's principal teacher, and I got a good opportunity to work with him on a number of occasions, and he had a huge influence on me. And his approach to structure actually is summarized in a book called The Choral Symposium. You know that book, with Harold Decker was the editor, and Julius Herford wrote a chapter on this. So that, figuring out how the pieces put together. If it's a piece of counterpoint, such as in the Brahms, all those, the fugal stuff, I'll go through and mark all of the subjects and the counter subjects. And then I'll mark what's exposition, where's the episode. Balance is a huge issue. Go back to Brahms. You go through, you notice there were places where I had the tenors double E out, go through. What are the balance problems? Where are the tenors going below the altos? Or when are they, so I just already know that there's going to be a problem. So we call it road mapping, and have voices move around. What about articulation? That's a huge factor. All of that stuff I think through as I prepare a score. And articulation is obviously where you breathe, but it's a whole lot more than that. Where would some staccatos help? Where would some accents help? Where all these kind of things, and sometimes that's related to the diction. Some of the markings that I gave you for in the Brahms was just to sort of help the diction. Gosh, where else? Balance. So balance, structure, articulation. Those, I guess, are big in the choral field. In orchestral, balances are sort of the same issue. I mean, sometimes, and that depends, of course, on the balance with the chorus. I mean, you'll hear me this evening before we go through some of these movements, mark down some of the sections in of some of the brass because I know it's going to be too loud. I mean, that sort of thing. And certainly with an orchestral work, with the Brahms, again, it's how it's put together, and what are the and with respect to strings, bowing is really important. I'm not a string person, so I would not know how to bow parts. However, I would sometimes sit down with the concertmaster, and then we would work out bowings, because for string players that's absolutely critical. And then articulation as far as strings are concerned, and also articulation as far as winds are concerned. Where you want them to breathe. And many times that'll be related to when the winds are doubling the chorus. So again we come back to articulation, structure. And in the case of orchestral stuff, bowing. That's really. And I because I work with the New York Philharmonic a lot, the bowings. The bowings for this performance come from the New York Philharmonic. They're from the New York Philharmonic bowings. I have a set of Brahms parts, and I sent some bowing. They're called bowing masters to the conductor, and they put the bowings in. I told her she could change them too, but that's really important. So if you're going to do orchestral conducting, you really need. I mean, I know something about bowing, but I don't know enough to bow the whole. I mean, string. You have to go to somebody that's a string player, or an expert. Yeah.
Tamara.
Yeah. Hi. Do you have a favorite 20th century composer?
A favorite what?
Favorite 20th century composer?
Well, yeah, Stravinsky probably. Yeah. I mean, Stravinsky and of that, yeah, probably Stravinsky. Schoenberg. I'm Friedrich Erdmann of Schoenberg is one of my great passions. Of the 20th century romantics, probably Samuel Barber, who I also got to work with. I knew him, but Stravinsky for me is Charles Ives. I think Charles Ives is as 20th century American composers. I think Charles Ives is probably the top of the list. I think Psalm 90 is one of the great works. American choral works of the 20th century, yeah, for sure.
Could you talk about your experience with Barber?
Yeah, I became a part of the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, or in Italy, in 1971. Giancarlo Menotti, the composer, came to Florida State where I was teaching, heard my chorus do a performance of one of his works called Unicorn, Gorgon, and Manticore. Said a lot of nice things and invited me to bring that group to his festival in Italy. We did. It was a success, and he invited me to become a part of that festival, which I was for a very long time. And then I brought the Westminster Choir, and we were there many years. Anyway, and Samuel Barber and Giancarlo Menotti were once partners, as I'm sure you know. They met at Curtis. They were both when they were young. So Sam, we kind of had that. I should say Mr. Barber in this context. So I got to know him because he came to the festival every year in Charleston, or in Italy. And then when we started the festival in Charleston in 1977, he came to that. And he would come to my rehearsals and came to our performances. And he asked that the Westminster Choir sing at his funeral. So I had so and he would come to parties of the Westminster Choir in Italy and stuff. And so I had a kind of a wonderful, warm relationship and with Menotti, of course, because he was the festival, the festival in Italy, and then the festival in Charleston, which is still going on. I just retired from that festival in 2013. I was a part of that when it began in 1977. But I did have a connection with Barbara because of that. That's how that came about. Yeah. A great composer, I think. Do you know the Reincarnations? I think they're just absolute masterpieces. Absolute. And the Agnus Dei, of course, it was written as a string quartet, still movement, and we've recorded the Agnus Dei, which I think is just gorgeous, and the big orchestral works are really beautiful. I mean, it's just violin concerto. I think he's a great composer.
The Agnus Dei is the only piece we've worked on as a Crane chorus and didn't quite finish.
It's hard. It's hard to sustain. Yeah, it's hard.
We postponed it indefinitely. Other questions? Anybody who has?
Well, it's a string piece. That's why it's so hard, as you know. That's why it's so bloody hard.
And I kept trying to make them sound like strings. Here's a couple of people who have
Yes,
asked
sir.
questions.
What do you feel is the most important to show as a conductor when you're doing a work like the Brahms, whether it's the emotional effect that each movement should have on the audience, or it's the cutoffs from the choir, or the shaping of the phrases? What do you feel is what you should portray?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have it. I mean, what is the shape and color? Shape is hugely important. I mean, the whole issue of linear music is where's the phrase going? At the micro level and at the macro level. What's the long line? And certainly a lot of the stuff that I was working with the orchestra and with you was where's the line going? Color. When we talked about, the color has to do with the relationship of the music and the text, and we've certainly talked some about that. Last night when we were going, the difference between Schmerz and Seufzen, for example, are two different colors, and for me that comes out of an absolute, always the question of how does the music symbolize the text, and I think I talked a little bit in the first rehearsal about how the meaning of the text, Selig sind die da Leidtragenden, denn die sollen getröstet werden. Blessed are those who bear pain, then they will be comforted. And how that's symbolized in the tension release. All of that stuff is for me getting inside the music. And then out of that comes the colors. So it's shape and color, I think is probably the big, sure, I mean, in terms of what the conductor does, I think that's the crux of the matter. And you set the tempo, of course. Set the tempo, and and sometimes on big cutoffs and entrances, all that sort of thing. And that very much relates to when breathing. We tried, as you know, I try to breathe with you all the time. I think that's really important for two or three reasons. First of all, if you breathe, if the body really opens and you get low breath, then you're encouraging your singers to do the same thing. Secondly, if you breathe, you're open, you're vulnerable, and then your singers open up and they become more vulnerable, and then you make a really intimate human connection. That's where the deep connection comes from. Conducting is not about controlling; it's about allowing. It's about And so the first entrance to the Brahms Requiem, I started with a breath. I'm sure the first time we sang it, you wonder, well, when are we supposed to start? I thought, well, I'll figure it out soon enough. Because I breathed,
And we hope that you keep breathing with us, because I don't want to step in at the last minute.
What?
We hope you keep breathing with us, because I don't want to have to step in at the last minute.
Okay.
Ms. Sheets.
You're a very positive conductor and teacher. So I was wondering, when you're with your students, do you make a conscious decision to be positive, or is that
No. I just think, no, I don't think so. I just think the alternative is totally counterproductive. If you beat up on people, they just either get angry or scared. and nothing is accomplished. So so I guess I never made a conscious decision to be positive because I always was sort of. Now I think I was a little more feisty when I was younger, maybe, People tell me I was a little less kind or whatever, but I don't know. I always thought I was really kind. But I've always believed that it's so important to encourage people, because people are trying. The only time that I really would ever explode at Westminster is on, and it didn't happen very often, but when it happened, it was memorable. But I also came down from it that fast, and it would be when I thought people were not given 100%. And I at home, and I would do that. Then I would suddenly. But that didn't happen. Maybe 2 or 3 times a year. I guess really would lose it.
The time you threw
Briefly.
The time you threw a piano. Was that one of those?
Never, no.
No,
Never threw stuff. Never did that. I think people that indulge in that do that because they don't know how to fix it. I generally know how to fix it. Often that's a substitute. That's just insecurity. Scream and yell and carry on, and it gets everybody gets scared, and it makes you look so important. I just think it makes you look insecure. Because you don't know how to fix it, so you lose it. So I think for me I just think isn't that? Don't you think it's just a fact of life? The way you deal with people. To make them feel empowered and valued. That's absolutely critical. Then everybody opens up and feels free to give more. To give their all, and then what also develops is trust. Trust is really critical. Trust is critical in any relationship. It's the same thing, but trust. Oftentimes conductors don't trust their singers. And I always say, I've always said to my conductor students, when I make the first gesture I make to bring a group, I assume it's going to sound beautiful. I do not assume it's not going to sound beautiful. If it's not, I fix it. But and that's a little bit the difference between people who view the world, the glass is half full or half empty. For me, the glass is always half full. If you're one of those that views the world, the glass is always half empty, get over it, fix it. No, because how that manifests itself in conducting is the conductor as critic, the conductor as monitor. Well, of course the conductor's monitor. Of course you're listening for problems, mistakes, bad rhythm, out of tuneness, and so on and so forth. But if you turn it around, it's fascinating. If you're listening for, and assuming everything's going to be positive, how many times that will in effect encourage that very thing to happen, And then if it needs to be fixed, you fix it, But I always assume it's going to be beautiful, And that's all related to. It's just related to what empowers people, what makes people feel valued. And I think that's so important.
We have time for one more question, but everybody who has a question, let's just share them and we'll let him answer whichever one he wants to answer. So,
well, yeah, I just saw this.
There's also one in the back there too.
Well, we've got time for 2.
Okay, two more. Kathy.
You talked about preparing choirs. Is there a big difference between preparing professional choirs, like going to a school and doing it at a college?
Not really. I mean, at Westminster, although the symphonic choir, the big choir at Westminster, was actually all the juniors and seniors, except those who were student teaching that particular semester, and then graduate students. The graduate students had 1 year of requirement. So, but we met 4 times a week, and so. And in New York, it just happened faster. But I mean, the process is kind of the same. It's just a little, you had younger students who are somewhat less experienced vocally. They all studied voice, but less experienced musically. Then you obviously have to, you learn, you know how long it takes to, or you figure out pretty quickly how long it takes to teach them the Brahms Requiem. I mean, I can do the Brahms Requiem with the professionals in, 6 hours of rehearsal, probably, or from start to finish, maybe. Probably because a whole lot of them have sung the piece. Six is maybe too short. I would at least, maybe 9 hours, Westminster, I might spend 4 or 5 weeks on it, 6 weeks maybe, if they'd never done the piece before. And like the third movement fugue, we teach that in section rehearsals. Probably one day is all we need, but the women go someplace and men do. It just speeds up the whole process, that sort of thing. But the goal is the same, There's one more.
Kate.
Does that answer your question? Yeah.
In that same vein of empowerment and making people feel valued.
Darling, it's really kind of, I'm sorry to hear, hard to hear.
Okay. In that same vein of empowerment and making people feel valued, how do you feel we can be using music and the arts to instill value and empowerment in people who don't otherwise feel valued or empowered?
Could you?
Yeah, so in that same vein of empowerment through
Yeah.
music, how can we use music to help others feel that don't otherwise feel empowered? How can we use music to help them feel that way?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I think being touching with greatness changes lives, I mean, I think if we lead, our students into even a beautiful folk song, something that has great truth, great value, their life, and your lives are changed because of touching, the soul of Brahms, in ways that you probably are unaware of, I just think that's what great music does, I think, and that's why I think it's so sad when we resort to this, there's just so much stuff coming off the press these days, which is, easy access, shelf life of, 5 minutes, and I'd much rather take something that's simple. Doesn't have to be complicated, but something that's simpler, like a folk song, and then you get, and then you lead people to see what a joyful experience that is, It changes their lives forever. Hopefully that's what my life has been about as a condition. It's not been, it's about changing lives. That's what teaching's about, isn't it? So implicitly it's transformative, I think. Does that answer your question? Yeah. If you talk about it, it doesn't work. It makes it's going to change your life. You go, really? How? No. You just do it. You just do it. You do it, but you get in there but that's also part of how you lead them there too. That they feel encouraged. They don't feel when they make mistakes. They don't feel like they're failing. And that's all. It's all part of the same process. I think. Being encouraged. I'm reminded of a student, this graduate student. In fact, I just saw him at the ACD convention in Salt Lake City, and he's still teaching in the same school. He was at an inner city school in New Orleans. This is before Katrina. I think it was New Orleans. Then it was someplace in Louisiana, in the inner city. So he had mostly underprivileged kids, because he was sort of in a really poor section of the city, but he has a gift as a teacher, and the graduate program at Westminster generally was 2 years. So I think it was the first Christmas holiday. He came, and we started working together, and then he came back after the holiday, and his kids in his choir at a party. And so they asked him if they could sing their favorite piece. And it was the Vittoria Ave Maria. He's a kid from the ghetto. Yeah. Because he was a great teacher. And we just think it was in this beautiful piece of Renaissance music, And it's, like, I thought, oh my God, how that changed their lives, this incredible thing, So I think sometimes we underestimate, what people can do, Never shortchange people. Never assume that they're somehow less able to go for the most, the things which are most valuable and most true and most meaningful, I mean, you have to be smart about it, and because, if you try to cram something down somebody's throat because you think it'll be good for them, well, forget it, But somehow, but if you also, lead them again to something that's, that has truth and integrity, and then they get really involved with it, it just does make a difference in their lives, And that's, how many of you are going to be teachers? Good for you. Great. Yeah. Because that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about changing lives, Minute it's about showing off, forget it, It's about helping people to create, beauty and that's, there's nothing more important, I mean, I've done a lot of conducting, and I've done a lot of, I've had a whole lot of, really great experiences in my life. But the thing that I most value is teaching, being a teacher, and that's also part of conducting, But anyway.
Well, thank you, Dr. Flummerfelt. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Great questions, folks. Thank you. It's great fun to chat with you. Anyway,
We'll stick around for about 5 minutes if anybody wants to come up and
okay.
ask
I'll
more
see you.
personal questions.
See you in a bit, right? This is the music facility.